Have you ever noticed that the most brilliant person in a room is often the one everyone else thinks is completely losing their mind? It is a strange, almost universal rule of human nature that the moment someone starts operating on a level of genuine genius, the rest of society does not applaud. They laugh, they point, and they label them an idiot. This is not just a modern quirk of internet culture or office politics. This is a deep, structural flaw in the way human minds process information, and nobody understood this tragic disconnect better than Friedrich Nietzsche. He spent his entire life writing books that he knew his contemporaries would not understand, famously stating that some people are born posthumously. He knew that if you are speaking a truth that is 50 years ahead of your time, to the people living in the present, you will not sound like a visionary. You will sound like a lunatic. Think about how your own brain handles things that do not fit into your current worldview. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting at work, and a colleague proposes an idea that sounds so absurdly counterintuitive you almost laugh out loud. It contradicts everything you have been taught about how your industry works. It bypasses the standard operating procedures. It sounds, for all intents and purposes, incredibly stupid. So you dismiss it. Everyone in the room dismisses it. But 3 years later, a competitor implements that exact strategy and completely disrupts the market, leaving your company scrambling to catch up. Why did your brain automatically label that brilliant idea as foolish? In psychology, this is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, but with a twist that most people do not talk about. We usually think of the Dunning-Kruger effect as incompetent people believing they are smart, but there is a mirror image to this bias. People who are operating at a highly complex level of cognitive processing often fail to realize how massive the gap is between their understanding and the understanding of the average person. Meanwhile, the average person, unable to see the complex web of connections the genius is making, simply assumes the genius is missing the obvious. When you cannot understand a concept, your brain does not usually say, "Oh, I must not be smart enough to get this." No, your brain protects its ego. It says this does not make sense, therefore, the person talking is an idiot. Nietzsche looked at this through the lens of evolutionary survival and herd behavior. To him, the majority of humanity belongs to what he called the herd. Now, this is not necessarily an insult, even though it sounds like one. The herd is a biological necessity. It represents the collective agreement on values, rules, and reality that keeps a society from collapsing into chaos. The herd survives by maintaining predictability. If everyone in the tribe suddenly decides to walk in different directions, the tribe dies. Therefore, the herd develops a shared language, a shared set of morals, and a shared way of looking at the world. But what happens when a genius comes along? A genius, by definition, is someone who sees beyond the current boundaries of the herd. They are looking at a horizon that the rest of the group cannot see yet. Because they see a different reality, they start acting in ways that seem completely irrational to those who are only looking at the ground beneath their feet. Nietzsche used a famous metaphor to describe this. He wrote about a madman who runs into a crowded marketplace in the morning, holding a lantern, crying out that he is searching for God. The people in the marketplace, who do not believe in God anyway but still live comfortably under the old social rules, find him hilarious. They laugh at him. They ask if God has gone missing like a child, or if he is hiding, or if he has gone on a voyage. To the crowd, this man with the lantern is a joke, an absolute fool. But the madman is not stupid. He is a prophet who realizes that society has killed its own foundation of absolute truth, and that without that foundation, a terrifying void is about to open up. He sees the coming collapse of meaning, the rise of nihilism, and the catastrophic wars of the 20th century. He is screaming in terror because he sees the iceberg. But to the passengers on the ship who are currently enjoying their drinks, he just looks like a guy shouting at the water. This is the tragedy of high-level thinking. When your cognitive horizon is 10 miles out, and everyone else is looking at the next 10 feet, your movements will look entirely erratic to them. If you see a storm coming on the horizon and you start boarding up the windows while the sun is still shining, the people walking by your house will think you are paranoid. They do not have the tools, the perspective, or the patience to look where you are looking. To understand why this happens psychologically, we have to look at how the human brain processes information through cognitive schemas. A schema is essentially a mental shortcut, a framework that helps you organize and interpret information. If you see a four-legged animal that barks, your brain immediately fits it into your dog schema. It takes zero effort. But what happens when you encounter something that completely violates your existing schemas? Imagine you are a medieval peasant. Your entire life is defined by the soil you farm, the church you attend, and the king you serve. One day, a traveler arrives and tells you that the earth is actually a giant ball spinning through a black void at thousands of miles an hour, held in place by an invisible force called gravity. To you, this traveler is not a scientist. He is a madman. His claims violate every single schema you have for reality. You do not feel the earth spinning. You see the sun rise and set. You know that if you drop an apple, it falls because it is heavy, not because of some invisible cosmic magnet. The traveler's explanation is so far outside your mental framework that the easiest, most logical thing for your brain to do is to reject it as nonsense. This is why geniuses appear stupid. They are presenting information that cannot be integrated into the existing schemas of the general public. And when a human brain is confronted with something it cannot categorize, it experiences cognitive dissonance, a state of mental discomfort. To resolve this discomfort, the brain has two choices. It can do the hard work of breaking down its old schemas and rebuilding them to accommodate the new information, or it can simply dismiss the source of the information as defective. Guess which option the brain chooses 99% of the time? It is much easier to say, that person is crazy, than it is to say, my entire understanding of reality is incomplete. Nietzsche argued that this dynamic creates a profound loneliness for the creative and intellectual pioneers of the world. He wrote about the concept of the fly on the marketplace. The flies are the common people, the gossipers, the critics, and the commentators who swarm around any great creator, buzzing with opinions and quick judgments. They want the creator to be like them. They want the creator's work to fit neatly into their small, everyday categories. When the creator refuses to do this, when they produce something that is raw, complex, and unclassifiable, the flies get angry. They sting. They accuse the creator of being pretentious, of being a failure, or of being incompetent. You see this play out constantly in creative fields. Think about the reception of some of the greatest artists in history. When Vincent van Gogh was painting his masterpieces, using bold, swirling brushstrokes and vibrant, unnatural colors, the art establishment of his time did not see a genius. They saw a man who did not know how to paint properly. His style was viewed as sloppy, chaotic, and amateurish. He was dismissed as a madman who was failing to replicate reality. The public schema for a good painting at the time was a highly detailed, realistic, almost photographic representation of a scene. Van Gogh's work completely violated that schema, so they assumed he was incompetent. He sold only one painting in his entire life and died in poverty, viewed by his community as a tragic, unstable failure. Only decades later did the rest of the world's cognitive schemas catch up to what Van Gogh was actually doing. Only then did people realize he was not failing to paint realistically. He was successfully painting emotion itself. But why does this gap exist in the first place? Why can some people see things so much earlier than everyone else? The answer lies in a psychological concept called latent inhibition. In a typical human brain, there is a filtering mechanism that constantly screens out irrelevant stimuli. Right now, as you watch this, your brain is ignoring the feel of your clothes against your skin, the hum of the refrigerator, the pattern on the wall, and the dozens of random thoughts passing through your subconscious. Your brain classifies these things as noise so you can focus on the signal. This is a crucial survival mechanism. If you had to consciously process every single sensory input, your mind would be overwhelmed, and you would be unable to function. People with high latent inhibition have very strong filters. They are great at focusing on a specific task and ignoring everything else. They see a table as just a table, a chair as just a chair, and a social rule as just a rule. But people with low latent inhibition have porous filters. Their brains let in a massive flood of information that others ignore. They do not just see a table. They see the grain of the wood. They think about the tree it came from. They wonder about the molecular structure of the varnish, and they connect it to a memory from their childhood. If you have low latent inhibition combined with a lower cognitive capacity, this can lead to mental illness, psychosis, and a total inability to cope with reality because the world is just too overwhelming. But if you have low latent inhibition combined with a very high IQ, something incredible happens. Your brain is able to take that massive flood of unfiltered information, organize it, find hidden patterns, and make connections that nobody else can see. This is the breeding ground for genius. However, because the genius is processing so much more raw data than the average person, their behavior will inevitably look strange to the observer. Imagine you are standing in a crowded, noisy room, and you are wearing a pair of high-tech headphones that allows you to hear a faint whisper from across the room, warning that the building is on fire. You suddenly jump up, knock over your chair, and start screaming for everyone to run. To the people in the room who are not wearing those headphones, you look completely insane. You have interrupted their pleasant conversations for no apparent reason. You have violated social etiquette. You have acted like a fool. From their perspective, you are stupid. But from your perspective, you are the only one acting rationally because you are privy to a stream of information they cannot access. This information gap is not just about intelligence, it is about language. Nietzsche pointed out that language is fundamentally a tool of the herd. Words are created to describe common, shared experiences. We have words for hunger, anger, cold, and sleep, because every human experiences these things. Language works by simplifying complex, individual experiences into crude, standardized symbols, so we can communicate them quickly. But a truly original thinker is experiencing thoughts, emotions, and concepts that have never been standardized. They are trying to describe a color that has no name. When they try to communicate these ideas using the limited vocabulary of the herd, the message gets distorted. It sounds clunky, contradictory, or completely nonsensical. Imagine trying to explain the concept of quantum physics using only the vocabulary of a 5-year-old. You would have to use words like magic, tiny balls, and teleporting. To an adult listening to you, you would sound like you were telling a silly fairy tale. You would look childish. This is the exact problem a genius faces when talking to the public. They are forced to translate multidimensional concepts into a one-dimensional language. In the process of translation, the genius of the idea is often lost, leaving behind a residue that looks like foolishness. Nietzsche wrote that when a high-altitude thinker speaks to those on the plains, their voice sounds like a screech. The people below cannot hear the nuance. They only hear the harshness of the tone. They do not realize that the thinker is shouting, because the distance between them is so vast. This brings us to a very uncomfortable truth about human psychology. We do not actually value truth as much as we value conformity. As social animals, our primary drive is to belong. For thousands of years, being cast out of the tribe meant certain death. Your brain is wired to prioritize social acceptance over objective accuracy. If the tribe agrees that the sky is green, your brain will experience massive pressure to agree, even if your own eyes tell you it is blue. This was demonstrated in the famous Asch conformity experiments in the 1950s. Researchers put a participant in a room with several actors. They showed the group a line on a card and asked them to match it with one of 3 other lines of varying lengths. The answer was incredibly obvious, but one by one, the actors deliberately gave the wrong answer. When it was the actual participant's turn to speak, Over 1/3 of them conformed to the obviously incorrect majority. They chose to deny the evidence of their own senses, just to avoid the awkwardness of being the lone voice of dissent. Now, imagine a genius who is constantly pointing out the wrong answers of the majority. They are not just disagreeing about the length of a line. They are disagreeing about religious dogmas, economic systems, social norms, and moral frameworks. The crowd does not look at this dissenter and think, "Oh, what an interesting, independent perspective." They feel threatened. If the dissenter is right, it means the crowd is wrong. It means their comfortable, shared reality is a lie. It means they have to do the painful work of questioning their own lives. To protect themselves from this existential dread, the crowd must discredit the dissenter. They cannot defeat the idea on its merits, because they do not have the cognitive tools to do so. So they attack the character, the sanity, and the intelligence of the person presenting the idea. They call them a fool, a conspiracy theorist, a heretic, or a troll. It is a psychological defense mechanism, designed to keep the herd's worldview intact. Consider how this played out in the life of Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician working in the mid-19th century. At the time, childbed fever was a deadly disease, killing up to 30% of women who gave birth in hospitals. Nobody knew what caused it. The prevailing medical consensus was that it was caused by bad air, excess bile, or poor ventilation. Semmelweis noticed something interesting. The ward run by medical students had a much higher mortality rate than the ward run by midwives. He looked for patterns and realized that the medical students were often performing autopsies on dead bodies immediately before delivering babies. The midwives, of course, did not perform autopsies. Semmelweis hypothesized that there were invisible particles on the students' hands, which we now know as bacteria, that were being transferred to the mothers. He instituted a simple policy. Everyone must wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution before examining patients. The mortality rate plummeted from nearly 20% to under 2%. It was a brilliant, life-saving discovery. Surely, the medical community celebrated him as a hero, right? No, they mocked him. They were deeply offended by the suggestion that their hands, the hands of gentlemen and respected doctors, could be dirty or cause death. They found his theory of invisible particles to be absurd, unscientific nonsense. Because Semmelweis could not provide a fully detailed scientific explanation for why the hand-washing worked, since microscopes were not yet advanced enough to show bacteria clearly, his colleagues dismissed his evidence-based results as fluke occurrences. He was ridiculed, rejected by his peers, and eventually lost his job. He suffered a nervous breakdown, was committed to an asylum, and died after being beaten by the guards. To the medical elite of his day, Semmelweis was an eccentric fool who was obsessed with washing his hands. His genius looked like madness, because it contradicted the established ego and beliefs of the medical herd. This story highlights a crucial aspect of why the crowd rejects the genius: the timing. A genius is someone who arrives too early at a truth. If you say something that is slightly ahead of your time, people will call you smart. If you say something that is decades ahead of your time, people will call you crazy. This is because knowledge is cumulative. To understand step 10 of a process, you have to understand steps 1 through 9. If a genius leaps directly to step 10 and tries to explain it to a crowd that is still struggling with step 2, the explanation will sound completely untethered from reality. It is like trying to explain the internet to someone in the 17th century. If you tell them that one day, people will carry small glass rectangles in their pockets that allow them to instantly talk to anyone on the planet, watch moving pictures of cats, and access the sum of human knowledge, they will not think you are a brilliant futurist. They will think you have been reading too many fairy tales. You cannot explain the internet without first explaining electricity, telecommunications, microprocessors, and software programming. Without those intermediate steps, your brilliant vision of the future is indistinguishable from magic or madness. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He knew that his own philosophy, which attacked the very foundations of Western morality and reason, would not be understood by his contemporaries. He wrote that his readers had to be clean, strong, and brave enough for an altitude where others would freeze. He knew he was writing for a future reader, someone who had lived through the collapse of the values he was criticizing. If you have ever felt like an outsider, if you have ever expressed an idea that you thought was incredibly clear and valuable, only to be met with blank stares, polite smiles, or outright hostility, you have experienced a tiny fraction of this dynamic. It is a lonely place to be. Your natural reaction might be to assume that you are the one who is wrong. You might feel a deep sense of self-doubt. You might think, if everyone else agrees on this, and I am the only one who thinks differently, I must be the stupid one. But psychology shows us that the majority is not a reliable gauge of truth. The majority is a gauge of consensus, and consensus is often nothing more than a shared, comfortable illusion. In fact, the more complex the world becomes, the more the average person relies on simple, black and white narratives to make sense of it. They do not want nuance. They do not want to hear that a situation is complicated, that there are no easy answers, or that their favorite political or social group is behaving hypocritically. They want a simple villain to hate and a simple hero to cheer for. When a genius comes along and points out the gray areas, the contradictions, and the hidden motives of both sides, they do not make friends. They alienate everyone. They are seen as a threat to the simple narratives that keep people feeling safe. Nietzsche described this as the fate of the free spirit. The free spirit is someone who has detached themselves from the dogmas of the herd. They do not seek comfort in ready-made beliefs. Instead, they climb the dangerous mountains of thought, looking at the world from a cold, clear height. But when they look down at the valleys where the herd lives, they realize they can never go back. They can never fit into those small, warm houses again. And if they try to speak to those in the valley, their voice will always sound strange, distant, and threatening. The next time you encounter someone whose ideas sound completely bizarre, counterintuitive, or downright foolish, pause before you dismiss them. Ask yourself if they are really missing the obvious, or if they are looking at a horizon that you cannot see yet. Are they really stupid? Or are they just standing on a higher mountain? Maybe the next time you feel completely misunderstood or out of step with the world around you, it is not a sign of failure, but rather that you are tuned into a frequency others simply cannot hear yet. Have you ever had to hide your own deepest insights or passions just to avoid being labeled as the odd one out in your social circle? If this perspective of Nietzsche's resonated with you today, taking a quick moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel really helps support this space so we can keep exploring these ideas together. I would genuinely love to hear about your own experiences with this in the comments, especially if you have ever felt that sting of being misjudged for thinking differently. Until we meet again, take care of yourself.